My nephew grinned, opening the $900 phone I bought. Then he just casually said, "You're just a walking ATM, my mom told me." Everyone burst out laughing. I just nodded. And that very night, I vanished. Without a word. But in the black backpack I left behind was something that would make my family never forget me again. The apartment smelled faintly of fried food and vanilla cake. Laughter ricocheted off the thin walls, tangled with the hum of pop music playing a little too loud from a Bluetooth speaker on the counter. Kids darted in and out of the cramped living room, paper plates in hand, frosting smeared on their cheeks. Evan stood near the doorway, half shadowed by the tall lamp, holding a small white box wrapped neatly with a silver ribbon. His fingers fidgeted with the edge of the bow, not out of nervousness exactly, but something quieter, something heavier. Jordan's voice cut through the din. "Is it time for presents?" The room gathered like a tide around him. One by one, gifts were unwrapped with cheers and oohs, basketballs, video games, a hoodie that was clearly too large but still met with feigned excitement. Then came Evan's gift. Jordan tore the wrapping quickly, impatient fingers revealing the sleek black box underneath. "No way," he breathed. "An iPhone? For real?" Cheers erupted. Someone slapped Evan on the back. Others laughed in admiration. Jordan held it up like a trophy. "Thanks, I guess." He turned toward the couch where his mother, Rachel, sat sipping a can of soda. "Mom said you're just a mobile wallet anyway," he added with a grin. "Right, Uncle Evan?" The laughter that followed wasn't cruel in intention, at least not from everyone, but it landed like a punch to Evan's chest. His smile faltered just barely. He looked at Rachel. She didn't deny it. Didn't speak. Just glanced at him once, then looked away as if it were easier not to see. Evan stood there, giftless now, applause still echoing around him. Something inside him tightened, not in anger, but in something lonelier. A question, maybe, about what it meant to give and still feel invisible. Evan smiled. Or something like a smile, the kind that barely curled the edges of his lips, the kind that people see and take as enough. He nodded, once, like always. Like habit. Like armor. Inside, though, something buckled. He stood in that room, surrounded by noise, by people he had known his entire life, and felt a strange kind of loneliness that didn't come from being alone, but from being unseen. His nephew's words replayed in his head, over and over, each time sharper. Just a mobile wallet. Laughter had followed, but all he'd heard was silence. A thick silence filled his chest now, pressing against his ribs, making it hard to breathe. His fingers twitched at his sides, empty now without the gift box. He shifted his weight, but the heaviness didn't move. 3 years. He thought of the 3 years since Dad died, when things got tight and someone had to step up. He remembered signing the checks for their mother's rent, month after month, when Rachel said she couldn't manage. He remembered the quiet phone call late at night, Rachel in tears over maxed-out credit cards, and how he'd cleared the balance without hesitation. And last Christmas, when Jordan's school laptop broke, the one he needed for his art class, Evan had worked overtime shifts to buy a new one. He hadn't even wrapped it, just handed it over with a sheepish, "Hope this helps." No one had ever said thank you. And now, to be reduced to this, a wallet with legs, a joke at a party. A weight settled in his chest like a stone. He kept smiling, nodding. But inside, something was cracking, something tender and weary and far too silent for the chaos of the room. That night, the city outside Evan's window hummed its usual lullaby, the distant rush of cars, the faint flicker of neon lights, the muffled lives of strangers beyond thin walls. But inside his small apartment, there was only silence. He sat on the edge of his bed for a long time, still dressed, keys in his hand, the imprint of that birthday still pressed against his thoughts. The laughter, the look on Rachel's face, the way no one stopped the words from settling like rust into his bones. His jaw ached from holding that smile too long. Slowly, he stood and began to move, not with anger, not even urgency, but with a strange kind of calm, like someone folding the last page of a letter. He opened the closet and pulled out the old black backpack. It was dusty, worn at the seams, the same one he had lugged around during college, filled with textbooks, late-night snacks, and dreams of a different life. But this time, it wouldn't hold clothes or chargers or notebooks. This time, it carried weight of another kind. He started gathering everything: receipts, bank statements, credit card records, rent confirmations. Every transfer, every transaction, every quiet, invisible lifeline he had extended to the people who now laughed at his expense. One by one, he slipped the papers into folders, then into the backpack, his movements gentle, almost reverent. It wasn't about proving a point. It wasn't even about anger anymore. It was simply time to let the truth exist, even if no one looked at it. At 1:14 a.m., he drove through the sleeping streets and stopped in front of Rachel's house. The porch light was off. No sound came from inside. Evan stepped out, placed the black backpack carefully at the door, and stood there for a moment, not waiting, not hoping. Just breathing. Then he turned and walked back into the night, lighter than he had been in years. The morning light crept gently into Evan's apartment, brushing against the blinds like a hesitant knock. He sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee warming his hands, untouched. The steam curled into the quiet, filling the space where noise used to live: phone alerts, forwarded bills, messages that always began with, "Can you help me with just this one thing?" The phone rang. Rachel. He watched the name flicker on the screen, then disappear. A minute later, it rang again, this time, He let it go to. He didn't need to answer. He already knew what they were calling about. The calls weren't out of concern or curiosity. They were alarms going off because the system they'd built, the one with him quietly holding up the floor, had finally stopped working. He opened his banking app with slow fingers, like he was closing the final chapter of a long, unfinished story. The numbers looked different now, not just in balance, but in meaning. No more automatic payments. No more quiet debits to cover overdue bills. No more monthly transfers labeled, "just for now," that somehow became permanent. With each tap, he dismantled the web he'd been trapped in: utility accounts, gone. Credit card links, severed. Insurance payments, canceled. A long overdue audit of his own heart, conducted in silence. It felt strange. Not triumphant. Not even angry. Just still. His thumb hovered over the final confirmation, then pressed. Done. The phone rang again, vibrating against the table like a heartbeat trying to pull him back. Evan looked at it, at the name, the history behind it, then gently turned the screen face down. Outside, the world moved on as if nothing had happened. But inside, something had shifted, not loudly but deeply. For the first time, Evan wasn't the one holding everything together. He was simply holding himself. At first, they thought it was just a moment, a silent protest, a brief retreat. Surely Evan would come around. He always did. But by the second day, the silence stretched too long, too thick. Rachel's messages became more frequent, more frantic. "Just talk to me. We need to figure this out. You're being dramatic." She showed up at his office, eyes tired and makeup slightly smudged, holding her phone like it might explain something. But the receptionist, polite but firm, told her Evan wasn't available. He had requested no visitors, no exceptions. Back home, their mother paced between rooms, phone in hand, muttering under her breath about ingratitude, about how after everything her own son could be so cruel. She sent a long message at midnight. "You're the worst son I could have raised. You've abandoned your family." Evan read it once. He didn't reply. But he knew, he finally knew, that this wasn't heartbreak. This wasn't regret. It was fear. Not fear of losing him, but fear of losing what he gave them. The constant buffer, the quiet rescuer, the reliable hand reaching into his wallet, into his peace, into his life. They weren't mourning his absence. They were panicking at the collapse of a system they had mistaken for love. They had called it family. He had called it love. But now he saw what it truly was: dependency, camouflaged in birthdays and phone calls that only came when something needed fixing. Evan sat alone by the window, watching the city shimmer in the dusk. For the first time in years, the silence around him didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space, the kind where something new might grow. It was a Tuesday evening. Rain tapped lightly against the windows of Evan's apartment, a quiet rhythm that filled the space where music or television might have once been. He had just finished folding a load of laundry when he heard the faint click of the front door unlocking. He froze. They still had a key. The door creaked open, and there they were, his mother, firm-jawed and accusatory, and Rachel, eyes wide, as if stepping into a place she never truly believed existed beyond Evan's wallet and his silences. "Evan," his mother began, voice already rising with that familiar tone, the one that always made him feel 12 again, small and apologizing for things he didn't do. But this time, he didn't shrink. "This is my home," he said, calm but unshakable. "You don't get to walk in like this anymore." Rachel stepped forward, her voice cracking. "We were worried. You've shut everyone out." Evan looked at her, really looked. The tears in her eyes weren't for him. They were for the fear of no longer having him as her backup plan. "No," he said softly but clearly. "I've stopped letting everyone in. There's a difference." His mother scoffed, about to speak again, but Evan raised a hand. "I'm done being your solution, your bank, your second thought. This apartment, this space, it's mine. You don't live here. You don't belong here unless I open that door for you. And from now on," he paused, steadying his voice, "no one calls me a mobile wallet again." Rachel began to cry, openly, helplessly. A few years ago, Evan might have reached for her, tried to soothe her, offered to talk it through. But not tonight. He walked to the door, opened it wide, and waited. "Please leave." They hesitated. Then slowly they stepped out. Evan closed the door behind them. It clicked shut with a quiet finality that felt like peace. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning. The house was unusually still, no music, no clinking dishes, no idle chatter. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, the worn black backpack Evan had left days ago finally in her hands. Their mother stood nearby, arms crossed, eyes hollow. No one had dared open it until now. Maybe part of them had been afraid of what they might find. Rachel slowly unzipped the bag. On top, folded with quiet precision, lay a handwritten letter in Evan's neat script. The paper trembled slightly in her hands as she unfolded it. "If I disappear tomorrow, at least now you'll know that I existed. That I carried more than bills, I carried all of you. And no one ever noticed." For a moment, no one spoke. A dense silence settled, and then Rachel reached further into the backpack. Paper after paper, envelope after envelope, tuition statements for Jordan's school, credit card receipts with her name on them, mortgage overpayments tied to their mother's house, health insurance premiums, utility bills. Dates going back 5 years. Every cent logged. Every debt covered. The weight of the bag was no longer just physical. Their mother's face began to crumble. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Rachel sat frozen, her thumb rubbing over the corner of a bill Evan had paid during the pandemic, the one she never even thanked him for. It became clear, in that small suburban kitchen, that they had never truly seen Evan. They had used his silence as permission, his reliability as entitlement, his sacrifices as invisible. And now, with every page they turned, they were staring at the life of a man who had loved them enough to break for them, and who finally chose to stop. The late afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the stadium, where thousands of fans roared in unison, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing in one of the higher rows. Evan sat beside his father, the old black backpack perched between them like a relic from a war they never spoke of. His father's eyes were sharp, unreadable, but his grip on the strap was firm, as if holding it gave him the upper hand. Evan knew why they were here. It wasn't about reconciliation. It never was. "I read your letter," his father began, voice low but edged. "You made your point. Now let's talk like men. You want boundaries, fine. But don't turn your back on your family." Evan kept his eyes on the field for a moment, watching the blur of players in motion. Then, slowly, he turned toward the man beside him. "That backpack," he said softly, "doesn't hold a weapon. It holds the truth. That for years I gave and gave, and all I got in return was silence, or worse, jokes at my expense." His father scoffed, but Evan didn't flinch. "Not this time. You never called unless you needed something. None of you did. And the moment I stopped being useful, I became a problem. Oh, disappointment." The cheering in the background rose like a tide, but between them, the world was still. "I was your walking wallet," Evan continued, voice steady, "but I'm not anymore. I'm done." His father's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing with restrained anger. But Evan didn't waver. There was no venom in his tone, only clarity, the calm that comes after years of drowning. He stood, looked down at the field one last time, then turned and walked away, leaving the backpack behind. His father didn't follow. Rachel's email came at 2:14 a.m., long after Evan had silenced all notifications. "I lost the job," it began. "They cut my hours, then let me go. I should have seen it coming. I don't know what to do." A few days later, his mother's message was shorter. "Bon exiroy. Kong du chi phi bao him. Mi met moi lam." The words were simple, but Evan could still hear the bitterness beneath them, not regret for how she had treated him, but the sting of no longer having him as her silent safety net. He read the messages but didn't reply. For once, silence wasn't a weapon. It was a boundary. And for the first time in his life, Evan had drawn it for himself. He started therapy on a quiet Thursday afternoon. The office smelled faintly of lavender, and the therapist, a woman with kind, knowing eyes, asked no invasive questions at first. She simply said, "You must be tired," and Evan, after a beat, nodded. That nod carried more weight than he expected. He sold most of what he owned, gave away furniture, cleared the clutter. His apartment began to feel like a sanctuary instead of a storage unit for obligations. No more emergency contacts. No more auto payments to accounts that weren't his. Slowly, he reached out to people he hadn't spoken to in years, a college friend who once offered him a spare room during finals week, a former colleague who'd invited him to coffee, twice, and had been ghosted both times. They replied warmly, without resentment. They had noticed his absence, yes, but not for what he could give, only for who he was. And for the first time in years, Evan began to feel something like peace. Not loud or triumphant, but quiet, steady. A year had passed, and the weight that once pressed so heavily on Evan's chest had begun to lift, replaced by a quiet stillness he had longed for but never believed possible. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered softly through the blinds of his modest apartment, a letter arrived. Simple, worn at the edges, written in a shaky handwriting he immediately recognized. It was from Jordan. Evan sat down carefully, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. The words inside were brief but heavy with meaning. "I didn't understand back then. I was too young, too careless. Now I'm older, and I see things more clearly. I'm sorry." For a moment, Evan felt the old familiar sting of betrayal, but it was softened by something new, hope. He didn't reply. He didn't feel the need to explain or reopen wounds that had begun to heal. Instead, he folded the letter gently and placed it inside a small wooden box on his shelf, right next to the photo of the black backpack that had once held so much unspoken truth. That letter was more than an apology. It was a sign that his existence, his struggles, and his silent endurance had left a mark, however small, on the people he once thought had forgotten him. Evan closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the calm after the storm settle within him. The chaos of the past was no longer his burden to carry. Now he was free to live for himself, quietly, peacefully, and fully. The scars remained, but they no longer defined him. And in that gentle stillness, Evan finally found his peace. Maybe I'm not the perfect son, brother, or uncle, but I am no longer just the walking wallet. If you're feeling invisible in your own family, remember this: you have the right to step back. You have the right to exist as a person, not just as a sacrifice. If you've been through something similar, please share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this.